Nice. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sophie Alexander, owner and lead practitioner at the Nutritional Wellness Center. And thank you for joining me for my talk all about toxicities, called Are Toxicities Ruining Your Health? This is a really exciting topic to me because I focus my practice on using a technique called nutrition response testing, for those of you who don't know me and don't know that. And I find with my work that I'm really interested in discovering what's the underlying causes of people's health concerns. Why are they suffering with the symptoms that they're suffering with? And what's behind that? Why has the body gone out of balance? And I find that toxicities are the number one reason why symptoms are happening. And so excited to share more information about that, and also tie it into how I help. So for folks who don't know me, I'll keep this brief for those who do. I've been doing the work of nutrition response testing on my body personally for about 12 years now. I've been the owner of Nutritional Wellness Center for 2 years, but the practice was founded 16 years ago by my mentor, Tara Lambert. And so we've been doing this work for a long time, and have definitely seen some patterns over the years. I was someone who found my way to the Nutritional Wellness Center as a client all those years ago because I was suffering with bad menstrual cramps, really bad gas, bloating, digestive pain, a lot of blood sugar balancing issues, and chronic Lyme symptoms in the form of like arthritic Lyme symptoms, so knee pain and hand pain. And I know my mind was blown when I had my first nutrition response testing appointment and was told that my body was out of balance due to mercury. And I racked my brain figuring out where that was coming from, because I was fortunately someone who, I didn't have any cavities. It was really a new thing to me to understand how pervasive these toxicities are, and how they can impact one's body. And so by starting to address mercury and working on, of course, some other imbalances, I very quickly started to feel better with especially the digestive issues and the blood sugar balancing issues. So much so that I was inspired to go back to school for nutrition, and then inspired to work at the Nutritional Wellness Center once I graduated. And so long story short, that's why I'm excited to share this information today. So to start us off, when the body is storing toxicities, as I was alluding to a moment ago, it can cause so many different symptoms in the body. So I see it connected to poor circulation, swelling and water retention, especially behind headaches and migraines, underlying cause of anxiety, depression, a lot of mental health issues, allergies, skin issues, yeast overgrowth that never clears up no matter what you do, arthritic pain, fatigue, so much behind chronic digestive issues such as constipation, obesity, cellulite, especially difficulty losing weight, that weight loss resistance. You can see the list goes on there. Sinus issues, gout, other digestive disorders, chronic cold respiratory disorders, sleep, that's a big one. And then bloating and gas, and as I mentioned, the weight loss resistance. And so clients are often surprised, that, it's not always, I'll talk about how important it is with diet and dietary choices, but a lot of times the first thing that we start working on, we come in and addressing, is getting the body's detoxification pathways working correctly again. So first we'll back up a little bit and just talk about some definitions. So the word toxin gets used very loosely. And so I always like to explain that actually technically toxins are poisons that are released by plants and parasites and bacteria and mold. And these things live in us and they can release these toxins. And so when we use that word toxic, it's very broad, it's very general. But in general, it refers to these pathogens rather than a slightly different word called toxicants, which I'll explain in a moment. But so part of the kind of the garbage cleanup that needs to happen in our bodies is one, the cleanup of all the toxins released by the things living within us. And then the other are the toxicants, which we need to address because they are things that we're getting exposed to. So toxicants are synthetic, human-made toxic elements and chemicals such as pesticides and herbicides and so on. And unfortunately, very, very pervasive. And I'll explain a bit more about where they come from. But so these toxins, excuse me, it gets very confusing. I'll say that I'll use the word toxins just broadly, but just know that it's can refer to many things. And a lot of this talk is going to be about toxicants. So they're released by our human activities. Unfortunately, they can be carcinogens, mutagens, allergens, neurotoxin. There are many endocrine disruptors. And the exposure with our health can have long-term health impacts. The most recent statistic I saw says that in the United States, we regularly use over 80,000 chemicals just in all sorts of industrial practices. And one of the heartbreaking things about it is in the United States, only 30 of those have been banned from personal care products. And I'll talk a little bit more about personal care products in a moment, but there's very little regulation or study of the long-term impacts of their regular usage. And so we're finding that these chemicals are really changing our body chemistry and particularly the gut microbiome. So really health problems start to occur with these chemicals as they're being used in the growing processes in our food. So they're affecting the soil microbes and then thus human microbes because they block or disrupt the normal chemical processes in our digestion and in our brain function. So many of you probably have heard of Monsanto, right? It's a very well known company, and they were really on the frontier of their product Roundup, touting that there was no problem with spraying these chemicals all over our foods, and especially in crops, and then in the crops that the animals eat that we then eat. But now it's gotten to a point where over 90% of all corn and soybeans are grown by using glyphosate, which is Roundup, and it's become the standard for anything that you see that's GMO. And so it's from the get-go on corn and soybeans, but then it's also used as a desiccant, what's called like a drying agent on other grains as well, like oats and wheat and barley. And potatoes, like so many farmers use it to like kill back weeds around the food that they're growing, as well as like blanket spreading it. And it travels very easily. So it's one of these things where folks are buying organic and they're buying non-GMO and they're really working to avoid, but it travels in the air. And it's found in the water. It's been found in rainwater. It's been found in lakes and rivers. And so it's one of these things where it's become used so much now. It's pervasive in our environment, and it's very hard to avoid it. And it has a half-life, or I might have that term wrong, but it has a life where it's still found in the soil 21 years later. And the standard for organic is that no pesticides have been used for 3 years. So sadly, even certified organic farms, they haven't been 21 years of being pesticide free before they start growing the veggies. So a little bit more about glyphosate, right? That's also known as Roundup. People spray it around their lawns to kill their dandelions. And they spray it in soccer fields to make it so the kids just have plain grass to run on, right? And then as I was just talking about how much is used in farming. So it's a strong metal chelator. It was originally designed to clean mineral scaling out of boiler systems. It was patented in 1961 for descaling mineral deposits out of pipes. But current usage in the United States is estimated at 2 billion pounds. Oh, sorry, this is globally. This is globally that it's used. It is is used a lot. And I'm quickly learning that it's becoming a huge part of just current health crises that we're seeing around the world. Because glyphosate stores in our bodies. So most of these pesticides that we get exposed to in general, and glyphosate in particular, just because it's so pervasive, they're fat soluble. So they end up stored in our fatty tissues. So they get stored in our brains, in our nerves, our nerve sheaths, in our glands, of course, in any fat cells that we might be carrying. And then it particularly disrupts connective tissue as well. So I find it accumulated in clients' joints. I find that folks who are just suddenly getting like rotator cuff injury, or they're, they fall and they tear. Yeah, I've had several clients recently who've fallen badly and then torn muscles in their shoulder. Yes, maybe they're in their 60s, but not at an age where you'd be like, why is that happening? And we realize, and through testing, through the nutrition response testing, is actually that there's been toxicity, particularly glyphosate accumulation in those joints, weakening all the ligaments and tissues there, making it easier for it to be damaged. Glyphosate's really interesting in that has a molecule in it that mimics glycine, which is one of our amino acids that our body uses to build proteins. And so some of my colleagues are hypothesizing and finding when it accumulates such in knees and in ligaments, is it because the glyphosate is swapping itself in there and substituting for the glycine. And thus it is sort of becoming a part of our body structure, and that making it that more difficult to remove. But yeah, as you can see with this image, of course, it accumulates so much in the digestive tract, and that's why we see it as an underlying piece of digestive issues, about pain, and especially pain in certain joints. But the brain being a big one too. I have a client that I've been working with for many years, suffering with a lot of anxiety and depression, and of course we've had successes over the years, but it's not fully handled. I mean, she wants to still feel better, and recently we really started digging deeper, and tracking the glyphosate. And as we've started to watch that diluting in her brain, her mood has improved a lot and has stabilized. So separate from glyphosate, which dominates so much as a toxic exposure, I did just want to talk about some other ways that we are bombarded by these 80,000 chemicals that are in regular usage, that are not well regulated. So that can be nonstick cookware, air fresheners, cleaning products and cleaning solutions, antibacterial soaps, flame retardants. So a lot of folks don't realize they're buying new furniture or they're buying new clothes, the chemical exposure that comes from using those. Fragrances, particularly scented products. If you use anything that uses the word fragrance on the label versus an essential oil, then you're getting a chemical exposure. Plastic food containers, and then particularly if folks microwave in plastic, it releases those plastics into the food. Plastic drink bottles, cosmetics, fabric softeners, shower curtains, and canned foods, the lining of canned foods. So it can be quite overwhelming, but I find that any little bit of people starting to switching over to safer products, it makes a tremendous difference. And so that's using ceramic or stainless steel or cookware, and starting to learn about safer brands for cosmetics, for shampoo and body wash and face wash, and just working your way through that list, using more glass. And every time you swap it out, it's going to reduce the current bombardment that you're getting. It doesn't handle what's already in your body and other things that you can't control. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But but it makes a huge difference in terms of allowing your body to shift into cleanup mode and to shift into handling what's stored internally versus just dealing with what it's constantly getting exposed to. But so let's talk a little bit about how our bodies do handle these things. Um, so our bodies are inherently always detoxing, right? So, there's a lot of fad stuff about detox diets, or, I need to detox, but just remember, you are always detoxing. But sometimes you need to do a little bit more. You need to support the body more with these pathways because they do get overwhelmed. The liver is the most important internal organ of detoxification, has what we call phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification cycles, and it's really important that those run smoothly in the body. So phase 1, you can think of it as like the garbage collector. It's working to pull and accumulate everything all together. Phase 2, those really nasty things they get converted. They actually become more toxic, turning them into phase 2 to turn them to be soluble to move out of the body. And that's why it can be so important that those cycles both run correctly. And then we need to eliminate properly. So the bowel is the number one way that we move things out. The kidneys can be another. If the system is backed up enough and isn't clearing toxicants properly, then it can start showing up in the skin, right? It can show up in these ways that we know it's overflowing into the lymph. People, if the liver is backed up, people get really itchy, have a change in body odor, they start getting rashes or skin bumps or acne, things like that. So just one other piece. So that's why it's so vital that people are clearing things out of the body regularly, right? So important that people are drinking enough water to keep it flushing through the kidneys. And even more important than people are pooping regularly, right? So many folks think it's okay to skip days, but we want to be having 1 to 3 bowel movements a day. But as I was saying, our body needs help removing these toxic elements, right? Our systems are designed for a certain amount of load, but not the amount of load that we now get exposed to. And I would say just even in my, I think 8 years of clinical practice, maybe it's getting on to 10 years now of clinical practice, like this is just becoming a bigger and bigger issue. I'm seeing bodies more overloaded. I'm seeing it harder to clear up. I'm seeing it at younger ages. And I'm seeing it accumulate in bodies that have really worked hard to lessen the exposure. Like I have a 9-year-old daughter who has had nutrition response testing done on her since in utero, right? And really I work to eat as organic as possible, and we live a pretty off the grid, like homestead lifestyle. And she tests for glyphosate, so it's gotten into her in some ways, somehow. So we need to help our bodies out. And I have found that these certain binders that I'm going to talk about are the most effective way to date in clinical practice that I have found to remove toxicities. So yeah, binders help clear the toxicities from our body. You may have heard of them. Like you may have heard of ones like activated charcoal or bentonite clay or diatomaceous earth or chlorella is another. These are all things that I have used a lot of and seen some success with. But it's really true that not all binders are created equal. And so I have been moving into the past year of using what are called carbon-based binders that are made with humic and fulvic acids. So these acids, they maximize the binder's energy, and that strengthens its binding capabilities. And that combination, I've just found it digs deeper and handles more than anything I've worked with. So humic and fulvic acids are created from the result of soil-based microbes breaking down old plant material. So they're recycling it and turning it into a nutrient-rich supply of organic matter, and then these acids are derived from that. And the humic acids or what are broken down and extracted further into fulvic acid extracts. And they are really unique because they provide very strong binding capability. They're selectively binding, which was very cool. In the past, I used to have clients, not eat or drink, or no, well, of course drink, but not eat anything 2 hours away from, the charcoal product that I was having them take. Whereas these binders, I can have them take from food. They don't bind the minerals or the nutrients from food, but they do bind any toxicities that might be in the food, right? So they're easier to take in that way, and they are, just very selective in how they work. They actually add nutrients and antioxidants to the body versus depleting the body. They have very low pH, meaning they're very active, and they don't leave things behind. They don't get overloaded, right? And they're not like a sponge that, like, once it gets to a certain amount, it starts to drip. It can't get saturated any further. And so, yeah, as the slide says, they're ultimate user-friendly binder. I do find this, that it enters far corners of the body and clears out things. It clears out things that I, had suspicions that were stored in places, but weren't showing up until we started to clean house in a different way. As I was mentioning, it gives the body nutrients it lacks and keeps the minerals in the body in balance. That has been a big issue in the past, where I'd had to supply so many extra minerals because the binders would be stripping minerals as well. And it can donate electrons to support the cells doing the detoxification processes. And what I think is really neat too is that, it can travel from cell to cell and provide different needs depending on what each cell needs too. So it can be very customized. And there are not a lot of natural-based products that can do this type of work, that can also successfully cross the blood-brain barrier and pull things out of the brain. But a couple of resources I like to always share when I'm talking about toxicity, especially because it can be so depressing, of how do you start to reduce your body's toxic load. And so the Environmental Working Group is a wonderful resource for healthy living, and they have a database called the Skin Deep database that you can go and you can look up your personal care products as and you can see how they rate, right? And in terms of safety, you want to be using products that rate at a 1 or a 2, and you'll be shocked. Even items that you might get from a health food store, that you look them up and they're not they're rating a 5 or a 6, and that really means that they can have a nice label that makes you think, oh, it's all natural and it's all good for you, but it's just so hard to really understand and read the labels that you trust the company, but there's no regulation, so they can be using whatever they like in there. This is personally why I use a lot of Beauty Counter, which is a company that makes really high quality, safer skincare products, and their products all rate mostly as 1s with Environmental Working Group. And so, look up your toothpaste, look up your shampoo, look up your body wash, your face wash, and start swapping them out. And another resource, I know I was pretty depressing about glyphosate earlier and talking about how it is everywhere, but of course it does make a difference to eat organic, and our demand as consumers for more organic is going to ongoing increase the standard and increase the supply of it. And so the Environmental Working Group does put out this list every year called the Clean 15 versus the Dirty Dozen. And so the Clean for 15 are things that you can safely buy not organic because pesticides are not used, or they're much lower usage, right? Just in the natural way of how they grow things. But the Dirty Dozen are the things that are the most heavily sprayed. That is really important, especially if you're on a budget with buying organic and you can only buy certain items organic. These are the ones to buy. It's all those lovely fruits. So yeah, strawberries is top of the list. Um, but I want to explain a little bit further and explain a little bit more about the nutrition response testing and how this ties in. Um, so if you see on this slide, we have a triangle. And at the top of the triangle, we have toxicities, right? And then in one corner, we have nutritional deficiencies. And in another corner, we have organ dysfunction. So, if any of the symptoms that I have talked about at this talk or I listed at the beginning, you're dealing with headaches, or you're dealing with digestive issues, or you're dealing with body pain in any way, I can tell you right now, your body's dealing with toxicities, even without testing you. And so if you got toxicities in your body, I know you have nutritional deficiencies. And when you have nutritional deficiencies, I know you have organ dysfunction. And then it can go the other way too. If you have organ dysfunction, then the body creates further nutritional deficiencies because it's trying so desperately to heal and repair these organs. And then the toxicities, it creates further symptoms. So if you substitute out the word toxicities and write headache or write knee pain, the nutritional deficiencies just exacerbate those symptoms even more. So what can happen, unfortunately, is with health, it can become a severe downward spiral where, if someone is dealing with this toxic exposure, it's starting to create symptoms, it's stripping the body of further nutrients, it's causing more organ dysfunction. And then that causes further symptoms and further nutritional deficiencies, and people to start to really have a downward spiral with their health. And it becomes harder and harder to figure out what's causing what, especially if you're just compartmentalizing it and you're like thinking, well, let's just look at the head, why the headaches, or let's only look at your knee, like why the knee pain. And folks either don't get left with answers, or they start doing drugs or surgeries for particular areas of the body, and it still doesn't end up getting to the root of why the body is struggling so much to begin with. So what we have to do is we have to put a stop to this cycle and start addressing what's getting in the way, like basically start addressing the toxicities so the body can begin to repair. And a big part of this is diet too. So this slide shows that I can swap out the symptoms and the toxicities at the top of the triangle, and I can put in the word sugar and tell you that sugar causes nutritional deficiencies and sugar in itself causes organ dysfunction. So I find that it really takes this multiple approach where clients are working on a customized basis, getting the sugar out of their diet and things that quickly break down into sugar, such as most processed grains, or all processed grains, I should say. And they start, again, reversing that cycle of the body breaking down, having more nutritional deficiencies, having further organ dysfunction. And so the customized addressing what toxicities are breaking the body down so much and getting the sugar sources out is really what gets to the bottom of creating true health, and looking at the body as a whole instead of as these isolated components, so that we can get to the underlying cause of why people are ill. And so, as in a summary, this is what's called nutrition response testing, and it's a non-invasive system of analyzing the body in order to determine these underlying causes of ill health. In the picture there, you can see that there's something sitting on the woman who's getting tested is abdomen, and those are our test kits, which have these pesticides in them, have these toxicities in them. That's how the mercury got picked up on me all those years ago. But it's a really safe, natural way that's so less expensive than actually doing very fancy functional tests to test for toxicities. And it's super easy. I test my kids with it. Other practitioner Fabiola tests her dogs with it. So there's amazing ways to even learn from nonverbal animals and little kids like that. And it's just very specific and very accurate in addressing what each individual body needs. Um, and so those of you who already are my clients, let's chat just about, if you're not taking these selective binders, let's chat about how we can add those in and really work to take things to the next level. And if you haven't worked with us yet, I really encourage you to give us a call, schedule initial assessment, see how we can help. Fabiola and I would be so happy to meet you and see how these things that I've been talking about today could help you. All right. Um, and with that, I'm going to stop recording. And then if folks have any questions for me, please feel free to use the chat. I'm happy to hang out for a little bit. We have a little bit of extra time, and I can explain anything more.